Today, we're going to be breaking down some wide receiver terms that every wide receiver needs to learn. So, the first one we're going to be going over is something called restack. So, what does restack mean? What does getting skinny mean? That's another term that you'll hear commonly used with the phrase restacking. So, what does all that mean? So, restacking is essentially where you get back over the top of the DB and you get this DB to be trailing your back hip and your back shoulder, essentially getting over the top, stacking over the top of him. And they call it restacking because, like, think about it, off the line of scrimmage, this DB is stacked over the top of us. Restacking is where we attack him, push up vertical, and get him to be trailing behind myself. So that's essentially what restacking means. And now getting skinny is running tight to the DB or getting vertical, I guess you could say. So let's break down the scenario. This wide receiver is running like a deep corner route, right? Which is like a 15-yard, breaking at 15. He's got a DB who's sitting like outside shade, off man coverage, maybe at about like 5 to 7 yards. So if his breaks at 15, his game plan is I'm not going to try to just run to the outside and break to the corner because this DB's lined up outside leverage. He's not going to let us get to the outside. He's trying to force us to the inside and prevent any type of outside breaking route. So my game plan as a receiver is I'm going to go attack him. I'm going to attack his leverage, which is what he's doing right here by throwing this fake to try to hold him. The best way to get a DB to hold to his leverage or to freeze or get some separation is make him think you're running where he doesn't want you to go. So that would be to the outside. So we make him think we're running to the outside and we take this inside release. Now the only way that I'm able to run a corner route with an inside release is if I get skinny, which is running tight to this DB, so that could set me up for this restack position where this DB is trailing my back hip. So he attacks him, he bursts to the inside, and he's got him stacked. Now, the reason why stacking is so important is because it gives you something called a two-way go, which essentially means that you could run. Now, obviously, we're running a corner route, right? We can't change the route in the middle of the play, but the DB doesn't necessarily know that. That two-way go means that I could either break to the corner or I could break to the post, right? I could go either way because I have him stacked. So that's when you could use a move at the top of the break called a rocker step. And we're going to break down what a rocker step is in a second because that's another term here in our wide receiver dictionary type video that you guys need to know. But when we have this DB stack, helps us at a two-way go. We could fake to the inside. He might think we're running an inside breaking route. And not only will this give us space on my route, like this corner route, being able to stack, take the inside release, take what the DB gives us, but we could get space. Stacking the DB is mainly for separation purposes. So let's play this thing again full speed one more time. So the first term you need to know is restacking, getting skinny. Every single time you face any form of man coverage, that should always be our goal, unless it's like off man coverage and you have to run a route that is a shorter route or underneath the off coverage. So second term that we're going to be going over, you guys, is called a rocker step. Now, there's a couple different versions of a rocker step. I mainly want to focus on when you should use it and the technique behind it. Now, before we get into this term, you guys, if you're a wide receiver and you would like a daily training schedule to follow this offseason, check out that very first link in the description below for our elite wide receiver training package. What you can get access to is 8 weeks of daily wide receiver on-field workouts, gym workouts, and speed development workouts. We break down everything like Monday you're doing this, Tuesday you're doing that. We give you the exact sets and reps, video examples of each drill, each speed exercise, and each gym exercise specifically for wide receivers. We also include a 50-minute long video on the recruiting process. So if you're a high school wide receiver, want to learn how you can get recruited, this is perfect for you. So guys, check out that very first link in the description below if you're interested in our elite wide receiver training package. Let's get back to this video. So now, a rocker step move, you guys. This is a really good example of a rocker step, especially on a like an out route or almost like kind of a deeper sail route. You can use this even on a corner route like the last example. But a rocker step is essentially when you step in the direction that you want to go first. And we were trying to fake the opposite direction. And this is a great move to use when we have a DB stacked, like the last example. Because remember, we want to get this DB stacked because I have a two-way go. I could either go outside or I could break to the inside. So rocker step, how you don't get confused. If I'm going outside, I want to step outside first. And that first step with the outside foot is not a very big step. It's a quick step. It's a hard step, but it's inside of your body frame. It's inside of your shoulder frame because my goal off of that step is to push to sell the inside move. The inside move, the second move, I guess you could say, of a rocker step is more important than the first move because that's ultimately what we are trying to sell. We have to be able to step somewhat kind of far, I guess you could say, but we mainly got to make sure that my hips and my shoulders sell this movement as I step, and that comes from your first step. Your first step allows you to push because, guys, Anytime that we have a DB stacked, remember, we restacked, first term that we went over. Anytime that we have a DB stacked, his eyes are not supposed to be looking at my head and shoulders. His eyes are supposed to be reading my hips and my body language. So I have to sell this movement with my hips and my body language. And that first step allows me to do it. If that step is short, hard step, and I can push off of this, that brings my hip, that brings my shoulder, that brings my head with that foot, and that is what ultimately sells this and can get me some separation on this move. So this rocker step, you could use it personally, I would say, in 4 different situations. You could use this if you're running a post route, so you would step with your inside foot first, then the outside foot. You could use this on a corner route, you would step with your outside foot, then the inside foot, and you could use this on an out route or a dig route. The only thing that would change is the move would be a little bit more horizontal rather than vertical like you would on a corner or a post in terms of the angle of your step. So rocker step, second term that all wide receivers need to learn because it is a great thing that you could use when you have a DB stacked or when you're in that restack position. Now, next term that I want to go over for wide receivers has to do with our press releases, and that is going to be something called a kick step. Now, a kick step is something that you would do with your back foot in a press release. A lot of old school wide receiver coaches hate on the kick step. They will say that it is a false step, and it is a false step if you're using it against zone. You never want to use this when the DB's 7 to 8 yards off and we just got to get up into the route. But if he is in press coverage, this is a great thing to use to give yourself more speed, more explosion, and to sell your release better off the ball. So pay attention to this receiver's back foot when I play this example full speed. He kicks behind the front foot, he steps wide, takes his inside release, and is able to get separation on a post. So let's talk about it, you guys. So a DB when he's in press coverage, more specifically when a DB is in head-up press coverage, right? And this wide receiver, let's say, obviously he's running a post route. On this release, this receiver is doing a release called a wide step. But you could use this kick step, honestly, pretty much, guys, on any press release. But if I got a DB who's in head-up press and I want to run a post route, ideally, what type of release would I want to take? Would I want to release outside or would I want to release inside? I'd want to release inside, right? Because ideally, I would love to have this DB on my outside hip, one cut, and bam, I'm open on that post. It's the path of least resistance, and that's what we want to take. Now, when this DB's in head-up press, though, I can't just take off and go run because he'll be able to get hands. He'll force me to the inside. I got to give him something off the ball to move him off his platform, move him outside so I get skinny on my inside release. Maybe that helps me stack him, or maybe I just get a little bit more space. I'm not just running over the middle into the safety help, linebackers, or other receivers on the field. So to be able to win against head-up press, I always tell my wide receivers, you want to be able to step outside of the DB's frame where I'm drawing this box on the screen right here. And I got to think of it like driving. If this DB's in the middle lane with us and I'm trying to get him to move to the far right lane, I actually have to step to the far right lane. Now, when I step to the far right lane, a lot of people might think, well, that's a very big step. Doesn't look like it's a big step. Doesn't look like this wide receiver is reaching way outside of his frame on this. And that is because he took that kick step. And when you could step this far and you have explosion, you have speed, and your hip, shoulder, and head are all going with your foot, that cut stays inside your frame so you'll be able to burst out, but it helps you sell it, guys. Because remember, a DB in press, he is going to be watching my hips. So when he does this kick step, you guys, this has got to be one of the quickest steps that you take. It cannot be a slow step. If it's a slow step, it defeats the entire purpose. So he kicks behind his front foot. The reason why this helps, guys, is it loads up your hip. It also creates a sense of urgency, and we'll talk about that in a second. But when you load your hip, there's something about it, you guys. When you load your hip up and then you try to throw that jab step, it just makes it easier for your body to go with this foot. If you come from a flat-footed position and your goal is just to step wide and try to step outside of his frame, it's very hard to get your body moving. That kick step allows you to load up and explode to the outside. Now, again, another thing, if this DB, think about just routes in general. Think about let's say I'm running like a 15-yard comeback, for example. All the way to the break, what do I got to sell? I got to sell fade. I got to sell vertical. I got to get that DB to open up his hips and run. I got to force a reaction out of him, right? And to force a reaction out of a DB, you need some speed. So off the ball, if we just throw this jab to the outside, it's just this weak jab with no speed, I'm not going to be able to get space, guys. This kick step is a way to create some explosion. You punch behind your front foot. You're trying to go as quickly as you can because that quickness right there will help your outside jab step or whatever release you decide to choose have more speed because you're not just coming from a position of being flat-footed. So a kick step, you guys, one of the best things I feel wide receivers can learn. Let's say, for example, this DB was inside shade. You could do this kick step, throw a quick jab to the outside, then a second jab to the inside. It creates some quickness and explosion and allows your hips to get moving with your feet. That's the most important thing, guys, especially when I have a head-up press DB. I got to step outside that frame, and I got to sell outside that frame with speed and bring in my body with the cut. So now, Next thing I want to talk about here, and I wouldn't say this is like a term, this is more like a phrase, and this is going to be what I call reading a DB. So a lot of times on this channel, especially if you guys keep up with these videos, we talk a lot about what wide receivers should do off the line of scrimmage versus certain press coverage looks. Like, okay, for example, if we have to run a dig route and we have inside shade press, our game plan is, okay, I'm not going to force the inside release because that DB's taking it away. I got to give him a move inside, take the outside release, try to stack him, restack like the first term we talked about, and win on this dig route. Now, this wide receiver here is going up against a DB who is in head-up press. Now, again, I would be lying to you guys if I said every single time you come off the line of scrimmage, you're going to have a plan, you're going to pick a release, and that's what you're going to do. That's your plan of action, and then you're just going to run the route. There are times as a wide receiver where this DB might disguise what he's doing. We may not know what this DB is trying to do pre-snap, and we have to be able to react off the DB. So reacting off the DB, reading the DB is the next, like, I guess, term or phrase that I feel receivers need to know. So this wide receiver is going to be running a dig route, and he has the DB who's lined up maybe about 2 yards away and head up press. So we don't necessarily know. Is he going to shade to the outside? Is he going to shade to the inside and try to prevent the inside release? Is he going to try to prevent the outside release? We don't know what he's doing. So the most important thing anytime I have a gap between this DB is I have to close the space with him. I got to eat up that cushion and force him into making a decision. If I eat up the space and this DB just sits there, okay, cool. I give him a move and I can take that inside release, just like the last example on that post. If I eat up the space and then this DB shades to the inside, okay, cool. I can put the brakes on and take that outside release. You got to be able to run your routes with an inside or an outside release to be able to play fast. So let's watch what this receiver does. He comes off the ball, he hesitates, DB jump to the outside, so he takes that easy inside release and runs that dig and is able to make a catch. QB needs to throw this earlier. Number one, we should not be catching a dig over onto the opposite hash. Number one, right? But again, you see how when he comes at him, he does this little hesitation release, and you see how this DB starts to shade to the outside. That DB very easily could have shaded to the inside, but a great receiver is great at reacting and reading a DB. So guys, off the ball, don't just get so caught up in a plan and then that's it. That's the only way that I could do it. Don't be married to a press release. If he changes up what we're trying to do, fine. Put the brakes on, react. Not every single release has to be the perfect, most crisp steps. Sometimes if we could just react off a DB and play fast, that will lead to plenty of separation.